Hey everyone, welcome back to the Jolie channel, or my channel. I am here with the March cards, tags, and more kit. The majority of it is made up with Stamperia's threads collection, but there is also some Jolie chipboard, some ink, that pack of 49 and Market flowers, some art impressions dies, and then there is the Stamperia. You have some chipboard embellishments, the 8x8 paper pad, and a sheet of rice paper. I honestly had so many ideas just start popping into my head as soon as I saw the threads collection, that it was actually harder for me to narrow down exactly what I wanted to work on. But this first project that I'm doing, I decided to make it functional, I guess you would say. Even though I try to keep my first project of the month mostly kit, I do pull some fabric from my stash. I have quite a stash of random bits of fabric, and I make a needlebook out of it. But I do incorporate the rice paper, some of the bits from the pack, and even some of that chipboard. Alright, so to start, because I'm going to be sewing on this and making it more functional, I'm kind of wanting to give a little extra strength to that rice paper, plus my second cards, tags, and more project. I also had already been planning ahead, and I would be using the rice paper for that. So there's a lot of different ways you could do this. There's some interfacing that already has the iron-on adhesive on it. You could just get iron-on adhesive and then add interfacing. I have a little bit of everything. So I think on this rice paper I just used the iron-on adhesive I have right there in my hand to do it. I just iron it onto the back of that rice paper, and that just gives it a little bit of extra strength for the needlebook and for the other project that I will be using that rice paper on. And I just have an old towel that I use just to protect and absorb the moisture. I live in a humid climate, so any kind of heat causes condensation anywhere. So it helps absorb the extra moisture and just give me a little bit of cushioning underneath for the hot surface. And I did add, that's parchment paper, just so that I would make sure not to get any glue on the bottom of my iron. Alright, and there you can see it might wrinkle up a bit. Maybe not necessarily stay smooth, especially with my towel underneath there. See if I can, there, kind of showing it right there. So I just went back over with the iron, try to smooth it out a bit. And then I did actually put it on the hard surface just to really try to push out the creases, but they're really not that bad and they don't really show up. And the square that I have those wrinkles on don't even show up because they're used in my next project. Well, my next cards, tags, and more project. Oh no, I did just put an iron-on adhesive on, and I think it's because my non-iron-on interfacing is a little bit thicker than my iron-on interfacing, so I did kind of want to use that little bit thicker one. So I'm just adhering the rice paper with that interfacing now. Alright, I am getting ready to, I'm kind of trying to get all my parts together for my Needlebook. I have some of the pieces cut out from the front cover there. That's the words, the threads and needles and thread, needle, and I forget what the other one was. Buttons. That was it. And I'm using the square of rice paper with the scissors and the square with the thread. And then I just grabbed up those green fabrics from my stash. And I have some gray felt. These are just felt pieces. I think they're 9 by 12 pieces. And I think they're like 32 cents each at Walmart. And I only needed 2 of them for this project. I also, before I did anything, I gave my rice paper just kind of a light coating of that Mod Podge acrylic sealer. It doesn't get stiff when it's in a thin coat. It just gets absorbed, and I thought that would just kind of help give a little bit of protection to that rice paper. My squares are 3 3/4 inches of rice paper. I think that's what it was, 3 3/4. All of the measurements are on the blog. And you get to that 3 3/4 inches if you go out from the edge of that printed lace about 1/8 of an inch or so. So there's my fabrics. I used the darker ones on the outer cover where those lighter background rice paper squares would be, but I also have a mix on the inside. I have some pearl cotton thread. I think it's size 5 pearl cotton thread, just to add some decorative stitching in. I was lucky that I just happened to have kind of that peach-ish color that goes along with the colors in the Stamperia paper pack. I have these smaller pieces of gray that I just kind of use as accent pieces. I use a piece of that gray for the spine of my Needlebook and for a few of the little patches inside. So all of the measurements for all of the fabric is on the blog post. The links are in the description box to go see the blog post if you want to get all those measurements. And so I'm just gonna come through here, get all of my pieces cut down to size. And this right here, I did find out my fabric cutter, the wheel on it, was a little bit dull, so it did make things a little harder for me, but I did get everything cut pretty good eventually. I will also say, I should tell people not to cut the way they see me cutting. I have been informed that the way I use sharp objects is frightening. I know I'm not supposed to aim towards myself, but I'm in a position here at my work table where I kind of have a little bit of limited mobility with my T-square there. So I try not to cut myself, and I try to cut safely, but don't cut the way you see me cut. I've been told it's frightening to watch. Alright, I have all my pieces cut, and this is just to help me. I honestly, sewing isn't my greatest skill, So I make sure that I try to make it as painless on myself as possible. So I did go through on the back side of each of my pieces of fabric and mark out a 1/4 inch for seam allowance. I used those dies. You can see right there, I had already put some iron-on adhesive on those bits of fabric before I ran them through the die cutting machine, so that I would just be able to iron them on. You can't really die cut fabric really well if it's too intricate of a die, because it just sort of disintegrates the fabric. I know I tried that pink doily dye from a few months back. I did want to see what would happen, and it did not work out. So now I'm just trying to put the pieces together, pick my parts out, and here you can see I have already put my little closure together. Put my felt in, getting it ready. When you sew your parts together, make sure you have them facing each other, the right sides facing each other for when you're going to be turning them inside out. And when you add in your closure, you want it inside that fold so that it will also poke out when you turn the final product inside out. Right here you can see I'm lining it up. I put it on the wrong side. I do go back later and pull it off and fix it. And then I have the Tim Holtz stitch slots, slotted stitches, something like that, a die that made that. And I have them really thick. I have 2 layers of fabric plus some felt plus some interfacing, just to give those little slots some strength. And then I'm just hand stitching using, it's a variegated like gray, from like a lighter gray to a black variegated thread that I stitched around. And because this has it was so thick and it has some fabric stabilizer in it, I found out that was really very actually difficult to stitch through. And then I just ironed on those little thread spools from the die cut pieces that I had made, and that's where I am lining it up. And because I know I can't sew in straight lines, and I wanted to center that back there, because I already had the front and the back together, I went from the center out instead of trying to center it from the outer edges. And I only had a couple little strips of adhesive, iron-on adhesive on that pocket just to hold it in place while I took it over and stitched it with my sewing machine. And then I just go through, work on the same process. I find the center of my pages so that I can work my way out. Like I said, I do not sew in a straight line. That's why I give myself like a full 1/4 inch for seam allowance when I cut, just so that there's room for me to work. If you're a much better sewer than me, you could probably make this base, all these base pages with a 1/4 yard of fabric. All together, all measured up, it is about 12 by a 30 rectangle worth of fabric. You can get fat quarters, and fat quarters are 18 by 21 inches, so depending on what directions you are cutting, you might be able to get it all out of one fat quarter. And then, like I said, I only needed 2 9 by 12 squares of felt for all of the felt, and I still had a bit of felt left that I just stuck in on some of the pages. There, you can see I had some little bits of that tannish fabric and just some solid dark brown fabric that I would add in for some accent colors. I used my pinking shears to just kind of give a nice little edge, and that is actually one of the rulers from the paper pad, and I had stuck it on some stabilizer to give it a little extra strength and thickness. I stitched around, hand stitched with that size 5 pearl cotton in some of the places. Those little scissors, because I cut some out of the gray and white fabric and some pieces out of the brown, I would use the brown to kind of make a shadow behind the gray piece. That's what I was doing with those scissors. I have the dark brown fabric die cut behind the gray and white. And on that little paper ruler, after I ironed it on, I did run it through my sewing machine. I didn't want to try to stitch through that stabilizer again. Oh yeah, because I had some dark brown felt in my stash that I also added. This is the center page of the book that's just a felt center, and I just go through, add on that dark brown felt to the gray felt. And on this page I use that kind of peachish colored pearl cotton thread that I had, just to add a little bit of hand stitching. I just used that little bit of trim along the back side of the stitching, covered up where the knots were, added a little bit of extra interest. Alright, I am back to my cover piece, and there's my first page, my second page, which isn't done yet, and then the center page that's just felt. And I do have that one done, and I stitched on the needles tag, and that little flip up just kind of hides the stitching, the back side of that stitching. I had put these together, just started, putting them together because I wanted to get those scissors and the other sewing machine set adhered down where it wouldn't keep getting knocked around or that I would lose it. And there's where the side that was originally supposed to be on. I had originally sewed it on the wrong side, but that was still the front cover. And it actually took me a while to figure out what was wrong with that. So I have this together, but I do want to add some decorative stitching on that around the rice paper areas, which I do get to. But you can see also, I did leave slots where you could put scissors or your seam rippers or any other tools that you may want to carry around with you. So here you can see I use that peach pearl cotton to just sort of add a little bit there. Even though it is ironed on with some iron-on adhesive, I still wanted to partly make sure that those edges stayed down, and then partly just add some decorative stitching. So, and this is where, because I had found out that going through that stabilizer was difficult, I had just gone through and kind of pre-poked my holes using a large needle. You see right there. You could use an awl to do it too, just making sure you don't go in too deep and make the hole too wide. So I just go around first and I kind of back stitch the straight stitches, and then come back around and come up from the edge and add those edge stitching. Here I'm working out where I want to add those chipboard buttons, and I just kind of rough up the backs of them so that the adhesive will stick to them better, because they do kind of have a coating on them. So I just kind of iron them on to a small piece of iron-on adhesive there. And that's, I just have to clean up the edges where there was some overlap from that adhesive before I put them down. And I just start with stitching them down just to hold them in place. And then I come back and get that adhesive melted through. And then I come in. I have some spools of some silk ribbon. I had a friend a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, that had introduced me to silk ribbon embroidery. And I had just happened to come across that spool, and I saw that green that went with the fabric I'd already picked out. So I decided to just add some decorative roses to the front coming out of those buttonholes. A lot of the parts of this needlebook are whatever you feel like adding in or decorating with. But now I am finally getting ready to start sewing them together. These are some different options you can have. If you don't make like the flap like I have, you could put like a hair tie ribbon in as part of a closure to come up and go around a button, or just a piece of trim. And before I turn it inside out, I do cut my corners just so there isn't a lot of fabric in those corners after I turn it right side out. You can cut your corners before you do your sewing, but like I said, I don't trust my sewing, so I wait until afterwards. And here, even though I had cut my pieces to size, I would just kind of trim off. That's my stabilizer going in, and I would just kind of trim off a little bit just to make sure that it didn't buckle underneath. So there, now you can see I have my layers of my cover put together. And my original plan was to make it a snap cover, but it turns out those snaps, they didn't go through as much as I thought they would, or I'd hoped they would, I guess. And I just ended up using like a large hook and eye type closure in it. And right here I have to show you that those hooks and eyes were bought in like 1980. My grandma wrote down the dates when she would buy things, and she paid 60 cents for that little pack in 1980. On this page, I decided to run those bits of trim all the way across. So I didn't want to necessarily stitch them down to the page until after the book was together, just to make sure they stayed where I wanted them. So I just tacked them down on the ends and then started adding in all of the other little bits and pieces of fabric and felt that I wanted to add in. You can see here I have a lot pinned in place, and I did that just so I could take it all over together and sew it together. And now that one is done, and I just got to add in the felt center and seal up the hole I had left for it. I do kind of trim just a tip off the corners of my felt before putting it in, just to also make sure that the corners of the pages don't get too bulky. Alright, for lining up so that I can sew all of the pages together, I add those straight pins in the top and the bottom. I find the center of my pages and my book cover, and then I add the straight pins so that I can line up those straight pins, and then I will know that everything is centered together. And then I also just add the straight pins in on the ends, so I will also be able to keep them centered that way, and then take them all over and run them through the sewing machine. Because even though it's rather thick, because the majority of it is fabric and felt is rather easy to sew through, it doesn't have a problem going through the sewing machine. So now all of my pages are together. You can kind of see what my ideas were. I thought it was a great use for those bits of chipboard, is you can just wrap your threads around them and stick them in that little pocket. As you can see from my struggles here, I actually need to find a place to put all my threads. And then I just snipped a little cut into the edge of it just to tail tuck so it wouldn't come unraveled. You can see lots of places here for needles to go in. The little felt heart, the felt pages, and I just kind of want to talk about, depending on how much sewing you do or don't like to or know how to do, another option for finishing your edges would be to add some seam binding around them. That was another one I did. You can just put straight felt pages in. It doesn't come out as thick. You can just have some felt pages without all of the sewing. Then you just have to sew down the center, or make a cover and then just sew down the center. here, this is what I was, I waited. It made it harder to sew, but I also made sure that I didn't pull those ribbons too tight before putting the book together. So I'm just adding a few more silk ribbon embroidery roses. Thank you for joining us here. I hope that you enjoyed this project and it gave you some ideas of alternate uses for the cards, tags, and more kit. It doesn't have to be just paper projects. It can be a functional project. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. And feel free to share the videos. Thank you. And I will see you again next week. C'est un